Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is April 12th, 2024, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? Today's going to be more of a rant, mostly related to what has been going on in Ukraine the last couple of days. And I want to start off with this article from Forbes, which is a really great article. I didn't copy the entire article here because it's very long, but the most important part. And before I begin, I just want to let you know, guys, I remember last year when I was full of optimism, especially even at the end of the year, where, the summer offensive didn't work out. It wasn't successful for the Ukrainians in terms of breaking through the southern sector, but there was still a lot of hope and optimism. It's not like it was over for the Ukrainians, and they had a lot of things going on for them. And, we understood that without air superiority, Ukraine would not be able to have a massive breakthrough. And they weren't ready to sacrifice lots of lives just for, some extra gains. So even then, in late 2023, there was so much optimism, and I myself, including many others, assumed that if all things kept on going, if all conditions were the same, which obviously wasn't the case. And since November, we've seen a massive sabotage everywhere in terms of helping the Ukrainians with the necessary weapons. And so, there was an assumption that all the differences would be put aside, and Ukraine would eventually receive the needed support, which obviously wasn't the case. So since then, what did we see? Now, I'm focusing more on the negative stuff. So, of course, it's not like it's all bad, but we saw a gradual disintegration, truly, of support and cohesion, especially from Ukraine's biggest ally, the United States, and a little bit from the West as well. NATO recently has not invited Ukraine to become a member, stating that the state of war is just one of those conditions that needs to be ended before Ukraine can be considered, which is in my opinion utter BS. The US right now, of course, we know, is too busy worrying about its elections and all the sabotage that is being done on this military bill, assistance bill. Poland recently, well, it wasn't recent, but for the last year, has been blocking Ukrainian checkpoints with the Polish farmer protests. And but with proof now that Poland is actually buying Russian goods and Belarusian goods, and they can transport the goods freely through the border without any issues. Whereas we see these protesters between the Ukrainian-Polish borders blocking any type of help. I'm not sure of the status right now, but I'm certain that it probably continues to be the case. And, you have countries like Germany, etc., that are afraid of transferring key crucial weapons like the Taurus. So Russia's misinformation and dirty money really paid off last year. I think that the Kremlin understood that they could not break the Ukrainian will, and they could not, militarily defeat Ukraine. So they started investing heavily into propaganda, misinformation, buying off dirty politicians left and right. And don't tell me that the GOP, especially the MAGA Republicans, don't have some dirty people in there, because I'm very convinced that that is the case for some of these people. It's not all bad. Let's face it, it's not like it's all bad. I'm just focusing on the very bad stuff where you're just like, you don't understand why this is happening. Why isn't there more cohesion? So overall, we have to recognize that Europe has stepped up. We have countries like France, countries like the Baltics, Scandinavia has really stepped up big time to help Ukraine. Netherlands recently announced another military aid package. So it's not all that bad. We see that Europe is slowly waking up. It's not a very quick waking up, but it's slow. But it still remains very weak in terms of its resolve and its messaging. How many times in the last few weeks you've been hearing statements from leaders or officials and maybes and we'll think about it? It's still so frustrating to hear that this slow pace of decision making is really literally killing the Ukrainian people. And I am tired of hearing maybes. Let's get the things done. Let's wake up, right? It's so frustrating because, we know that Ukraine is so close to defeating Russia. This article by Forbes mentions that Russia has about 1 year reserves of weapons left. So Ukraine, literally in a year, had it been receiving the weapons necessary to defend itself, would have been able to defeat Russia. To a certain extent, it doesn't mean that it would have been able to drive out Russians completely out of Ukraine, but they would be in a much more favorable position right now. Which isn't the case, because we've seen a gradual pullback, especially from the United States. And, this article really perfectly summarized the situation. So Russia is essentially turned into a full total war economy. politically, industrially, militarily. It has all the gears going towards the military, right? Everything, all the resources are going towards supporting their war efforts against Ukraine. But Russia is also depleting its only resources of weaponry, which is stockpiles of Cold War vintage weapons. Their T-55s, T-62s, you guys know. And you have seen these images of their old Soviet tanks that they're utilizing right now. So Russia's strong, yes, because it's a full total war economy, but it's fragile because it can't really innovate and produce weapons that are game changers. It's heavily relying right now on its stockpiles of Soviet weaponry. Ukraine is also mobilizing, but it relies heavily still to this day on foreign aid to meet urgent financial and military needs. And as we've seen with the Russian-friendly Republicans, especially the MAGA Republicans in the House of Representatives that are withholding this massive military aid package that was supposed to be passed in November of last year. So we know as well, thirdly, that the Ukraine tactics are superior to Russian tactics, which helps the Ukrainians in most cases defeat large Russian formations. But it's irrelevant when and where how Ukraine is going to be able to defeat Russia when it simply will run out of ammunition one day and won't be able to fight anymore. And so this interplay of the three dynamics explains all these contradictions, right? Ukraine is strong, but at the same time, it won't be strong if in a few weeks or a few months or a year, it will run out completely out of ammunition. And so, you know, this is what's really frustrating to me is that we're so close yet so far. We know what it takes to defeat Russia. We're so close to defeating them. And it almost feels like this is on purpose at this point. It almost feels like the Ukraine allies simply don't want Russia to be defeated. They're fearful of the consequences of Russia collapsing. I think that this is completely unfair if that is the case. God forbid that's the case. Because you have experts, you have generals, you have people that are literally supposed to do their jobs to plan for such situations. I mean, it's, in my opinion, it's just a question of time when Russia is going to collapse. With the way things are going, even if they somehow manage to win against Ukraine, they will not last for long. It could be 10 years, it could be 20 years, but Russia's cycle will eventually end. And it's been the case. We just have to look at the last century to see how many times Russia collapsed. And it is following the same path. But the fact that they're worried right now, that their comfort level is going to drop to zero following a collapse of Russia or Ukraine winning is unacceptable. And you're literally jeopardizing the lives of millions of Ukrainians because of that. And speaking of jeopardizing, well, you guys remember in my last video, I've talked about the United States having very questionable statements advising Ukraine or telling Ukraine that they shouldn't be striking Russian oil refineries and infrastructure. And it's very positive because today, Mikhailo Podolyak, which is the head of the office of the president, so he's a very important, influential figure within Zelensky's administration. And he says pretty much that Ukraine will continue to destroy Russian oil refineries and they're waging a defensive war. We are waging a defensive war and have every right and obligation to destroy the entire war infrastructure of the aggressor. So it's a very positive statement by him. It's good to see that Ukraine, it appears to be the case that they're not budging. And why should they? Again, the American leadership right now and NATO have no moral right to tell the Ukrainians what they can or can't strike. No moral right. When they have failed Ukraine, when they have failed more specifically to provide the Ukrainians with the necessary weapons on a timely manner. I'm not saying that they haven't been providing assistance. They have. And for that, the Ukrainians are grateful. But they are providing that crucial assistance when the Ukrainians have been begging for 20 times. How many examples do I need to provide to you guys? The Abrams, the Leopard debates, the HIMARS debates, the F-16s, the MiG-29s. You know, I can go on and on and on with the amount of examples that we can pull out the last 2 years where Ukraine has to beg 30 times before they receive this. They have to, you know, they basically become annoying, but they don't have the choice. The Ukrainian people don't have the choice. So Ukraine absolutely has the right to strike Russian oil refineries. And you know that Ukraine has found a very soft spot of Russia and the United States. And I think this will serve as a very effective instrument of pressure on Ukrainian allies. You don't want us to be hitting oil refineries because you're too afraid of gas prices or diesel prices going up. Give us the weapons. Give us the weapons that we've been begging for and asking for the last 2 years. Why is that so difficult? That's it, right? So I think that Ukraine absolutely needs to continue this, because this is a truly an instrument of pressure that Ukraine has found that is very effective. So this is kind of my frustration in hearing these very contradictory statements. So we're going to help the Ukrainians no matter how long it takes, whatever it takes. And it doesn't seem to be the case, especially from the United States. And as I've mentioned to you guys in my previous video, the United States, in my opinion, has really become an extremely unreliable partner. And I think my realization is more in the long run. In the short run, you know, the Americans have proven themselves to be very effective in providing assistance. But in the long run, we know that elections, economic interests, geopolitical interests, they might fade away. And that might not be that interesting for the US leadership to assist Ukraine anymore. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. So in the long run, unfortunately, with all due respect to my American viewers, the US leadership is simply unreliable. And I think there's several examples in recent history where that happened. Afghanistan is one of the latest examples, right? You can say that perhaps it was a waste to spend 20 years in Afghanistan, but look at all the investments that the United States put in Afghanistan and just retreated, and less than 2-3 days, all of these investments just disappeared, and the Taliban came back without any opposition whatsoever. And many Afghan people wish that the United States had stayed, but that's for another time. We're not going to go over this topic. We know that the Ukrainians absolutely are begging for help, are begging for the United States to help the Ukrainian people, and the US right now is pulling away completely, right? And that's so frustrating for me, because we know that the Americans value very much so democracy and freedom, and you're not protecting that value, those values that you believe in right now. So that's my little rant, but let's finish off with some positive news. And the UK is planning to transfer Ukraine some Dragonfire laser weapons. So I think it was a few months ago they successfully tested. It's sort of like an air defense system that uses a very precise laser. As you can see, it works by focusing 37 channels of 1.5 kilowatt laser beams that are arranged in a hexagonal array. And when they combine them with mirrors to merge and amplify the power, they get to destroy air targets. And you can see that they tested on a drone. You can see it completely melted away, the frontal part of the drone. And the cost of utilizing this Dragonfire, so cost of a shot is around 10 pounds. So very, very cheap. I mean, thousands of times cheaper than using a missile. Now, it's positive, but again, with a grain of salt, because first of all, we don't know when the UK is going to provide that Ukraine, how many numbers. Of course, if Ukraine receives dozens of them, it's much better than receiving 2 or 3. And here it's also a matter of how many Ukraine will receive, but it's also a testing weapon. They're testing this weapon. So I seriously doubt that the Ukrainians are going to receive hundreds or even a few dozen of these systems, because I think the UK just wants to test them out in real war applications. But if they can prove themselves to be very effective, and surely I believe that these systems might be much more cheaper than IRIS-T systems, Patriots, and especially when you need to constantly replenish the missiles. And here, well, you don't really need to replenish anything. You just need to have a source of power for these very intense laser beams. And the cost of a shot is 10 pounds. I mean, this is super efficient. And if they can prove themselves to be effective against drones or missiles, I think this is a very big game-changing weapon in terms of air defense. But it's still unclear. The UK military hasn't confirmed what the range of this Dragonfire is. So that is another question mark. So there's too many question marks for us to say that this is going to be a massive help for Ukraine, but it's better than nothing. But I'm interested to see how effective, if Ukraine will receive these Dragonfire systems, how effective they will be against Shahed drones, etc. Or maybe they could potentially intercept missiles. Who knows? I don't know. So that's the video for today, guys. I apologize for the rant, but I just need to vent off. And again, the way that we can help is by donating money to the Ukrainian cause, whether it be for drones, whether it be for humanitarian aid, financial assistance. Right now, the front line is being held up by mostly civilian donations. people like you and me and Ukrainian people are doing everything possible to defend themselves and defeat Russia. And we can get it done. If our leadership doesn't want to do it, we can do it ourselves. And there's billions of us on this planet, millions of us, perhaps, maybe exaggerating. I'm exaggerating with the billions of us, but there's millions of us and we can make a difference. And this Russian propaganda and misinformation that is trying to divide us, we cannot allow it to win, right? Because that's what is really the strong point of Russia. They're good at that. They're good at misinformation. They're good at spreading propaganda. And you know that the Russians right now are getting weaker and weaker because we hear now discussions of the Istanbul, the Turkish peace plan, which Putin now supports. And you know that if Putin supports it, first of all, it means that it's going to throw the Ukrainians under the bus, but it's also that Putin is desperate to have some ceasefire. He understands that his army is in a critical position right now, and he needs to continue pushing. He doesn't have a choice. He can't freeze the conflict. So right now is the time for us to double down, continue helping the Ukrainians, send whatever, extra funds that you have to help the Ukrainian cause. And I will do so. I will continue to do so almost on a daily basis. And I can only hope that you guys are doing the same. Thank you so much. Again, if you enjoy my content, subscribe to my channel. Leave me a like. Leave me a comment about any of the topics I covered today. I'm eager to hear your opinions. And I will see you guys in the next one. Slava Ukraini!